Unlock the power of the Marquee tool. Welcome to this lecture where we'll talk about the Marquee tool. Its name might not tell you much, but it's one of the tools I use constantly in my projects. Okay, let's get started. First, its hotkey is M, but you can also select it from the Tools panel on the left. It breaks down into two main tools, rectangular marquee and the elliptical marquee. The other two are rarely used, so we'll ignore them. Their name implies the differences between them, but let me quickly illustrate. Here's the rectangular marquee, and here's the elliptical one. What I just did is called a selection. That's what the Marquee tool does at its core. It creates selections. Otherwise put, you isolate a certain number of pixels from the particular layer you've selected. That means you can get the brush tool and paint over the canvas like crazy, but only your selection will suffer the edits. That gives you fantastic flexibility. We have several selection tools available and we'll discuss some in this section. Right now, our focus is on the Marquee tool. After you've made a selection on the canvas, you'll see what's called marching ants in the industry. That tells you a selection is active in that area. If you want to deselect, you can hit Ctrl-D, or you can go to Select, Deselect. By default, after you've made one selection, if you repeat the process, you'll discard your initial one. So let's say I selected this sky region, but I wanted to get some of the sea as well. If I drag again, I won't get a combined selection, instead I'll get the latest one. If you want to add to that selection, you need to hold down the Shift key. You'll immediately notice a plus symbol next to your cursor. That means you'll expand your region. If you hold down Alt, you'll remove parts from it. As you can see, the selection shrinks. I advise you to get it right from the start. I rarely use these modifier keys to adjust my initial selection. An important thing to note is the current layer you're working on. If you create a selection on a raster layer, everything is good. You get complete freedom. You can see this layer falls into that category. So I can use the Marquee tool to remove the sun. I'll make a selection next to it, then I'll use Ctrl-T. Now I'll drag towards the right. And there you go, no more sun. Essentially, I'm stretching over those pixels from my selection, but since it's a solid color, we will have no artifacts or any issues. Remember not to use this technique if you have patterns, textures, or anything other than a solid color. Now I'll get the ellipse tool and draw my sun. I'm using Shift to constrain its proportions, making it a perfect circle. Now I'll double-click its thumbnail and change its color to a nice yellow, something similar to our sand. Okay, looking good. Note the difference. I have this shape layer selected, and I'll try to recreate my previous steps. I'll get the Marquee tool, I'll make the selection, and I'll try to use Ctrl-T, but nothing happens. There's nothing wrong with my keyboard, that's how selection tools work. They need raster layers. Here we have a shape layer. If we try the same thing on the Smart Object on the Layers panel, you'll see the same story. We can't transform it, even though I'm pressing Ctrl-T. Not only that, but we can't paint over it. We can't directly adjust it. Also, if you have two or more raster layers stacked on top of each other, the Marquee tool only works on the selected one, so it doesn't drill down and isolate all those pixels. Plus, if you select several raster layers, here I will just duplicate this one and use Ctrl-T, you'll see it's like I don't have a selection active. So that's not how you should use this tool. Instead, focus on one layer at a time. Another interesting thing you can do with Marquee is remove parts of raster layers. For example, say I want to reuse the central region from this project in another one. I'll get the Marquee tool, make my selection, and get the Move tool. As you can see, it's like I'm cutting it out. Let me undo. If you create a new project and repeat the process, you'll notice something interesting. You seem to cut it from the canvas and place it in another project, but when you return, you'll see it's still there. That's because Photoshop makes a copy for you. Speaking of that, you can duplicate that region you selected with Ctrl-J. Another interesting technique that involves the Marquee tool is this. You can delete regions with precision. Let me demonstrate. I'll first create a copy of this Smart Object and I'll rasterize it. Remember, you can do that by right-clicking in the Layers panel and hitting Rasterize Layer, or you can get a brush or the eraser and click once. Quickly press OK and it does the same thing. Now I want this sand shape to be perfectly straight on its right side. The Marquee tool is great for this type of precision work. I'll make my selection and I'll press Delete. Now I'll introduce you to the Fill command. Use Shift F5 and this dialog will appear asking you how you want to fill that region. I want to use a colour. Immediately you get the colour picker and I'll sample anywhere on the sand. Use Ctrl D to deselect and Ctrl 1 to zoom back out at 100%. I'm not sure how impressive this seems, but I can assure you it's a technique I use constantly. Other selection tools don't achieve this pixel-perfect precision with ease. Here, the rectangle marquee gives you straight lines 100% of the time. The last interesting way of using this tool is for aligning objects precisely. Let's say we want to move our sun between these two birds. I want it exactly in the middle. How can we do that fast? My answer is this. Make a selection with the Marquee tool. Try to be as accurate as possible, starting from the left all the way to the right. Zoom in if needed. Now, switch over to the Move tool. Your selection will remain active. Now use Align Horizontal Centers, and there you go. We had to use the Marquee tool because all these objects are in one layer, so we couldn't select each bird individually or anything like that. The Marquee tool is a real time saver, and I use this technique in many situations. Lastly, everything I mentioned applies to the elliptical Marquee tool. One final boss mode technique I want to leave you with is this. Say we wanted to select the sun. Obviously, this calls for the elliptical marquee, but I'm not sure from where I want to start dragging. As you can see, I don't really have precision here. I'm selecting other bits too. Here's what you need to do. Zoom in and approximate where the center of the sun is. Drag from that point and hold down Alt and Shift. This creates the selection from your initial position of the cursor, aka the center of the sun. Now, as you expand your selection, you have an easier job getting it done right. But if you didn't approximate the center well enough, you may be a little to the side. How can you move this selection without letting go? Remember, if you let go, that's it. You'll either have to start over or try to add it with the Shift key, which will not go well. Here's the solution. While holding down the Shift and Alt key, add spacebar into the mix. I know it sounds crazy, but find some free parts of your hand and keep these 3 keys pressed. Now, with your mouse, you can reposition your selection until it's correct. I told you this is the final boss technique. Now that wraps up the Marquee tools. I want you to download this PSD and recreate every step, including this last one. Have fun!